Hi, everybody. I'm here with Dr. Cheryl Rivers of Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. And you've agreed to come on, as if this is a TV show, come on this course and join us here and speak with me and our students about ethics in negotiation, such an important topic and a digging deeper topic in this negotiation course. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And I just want to start off with a very basic question of what is ethics and what is ethics in negotiation?
Okay, so ethics are our rule book that we have for what's the right thing to do in a particular situation. And the situation part, most ethics are situational, because if you think about a negotiation, how I might negotiate with you to buy a car, because you're my friend, would be very different from how I would negotiate with a complete stranger. So it depends on the situation of the negotiation, who we're negotiating with, guides what's right in this particular situation.
What's on my mind is another deceptively simple as if question of why do ethics matter so much in negotiation in particular?
Well, they matter a lot in negotiation because negotiations are characterised by this term that academics call information asymmetry. Okay? Yeah. So information asymmetry is you come into a negotiation and you have a set of information, and I have a set of information. You don't know what I know. Right. I don't know what you know.
And that's it'll always be that way.
Always like that in every negotiation, and that gives us an opportunity to lie.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something like to be creative, to lie. It does. We're alone with ourself and our conscience, and the others don't know, and we can just put anything we want to.
Yeah. So how much did you pay for the car when you bought it 2 years ago?
Oh, $40,000.
Exactly.
For a $10,000.
The reality and what you tell me might be two different things, and I don't know because I don't have that information. Right. So that's what makes negotiation particularly special and provides us, both sides, with an opportunity to perhaps be unethical.
Right, and I think I'm tying that into something that I have in my mind, that negotiation kind of brings opportunities for unethical behavior to a point, because that's the point at which we desire something, we want to get something, we want to, and we're right there at opportunity's door, and there's like a pile of value or a new car and whatever it is we want, and it's right there, and all we might have to do is
just tell one little, well, you don't even have to lie, you could just withhold information. Some people deem withholding information as
and maybe we'll talk later about different categories of what we do, but so it's right there. The other person doesn't. Maybe I can get away. So what kind of determines? A lot of things probably determine. What determines, let's say, when I'm thinking about someone else and whether he or she may act unethically towards me, or whether I will act?
Okay.
What do we know?
Okay.
What do we know?
Well, all the research tells us that that there were early days in the ethics research. There was a lot of studies on age and gender, and so we know that as people get older, they tend to become more ethical or more moral. We know that over the majority of the studies that women tend to be more ethical than men. So guys, that means you want to negotiate with me, a middle-aged woman, over your 20-year-old male colleagues.
I'm no rookie, so I'm not going to comment on what she just said. Please continue,
it's
Dr.
True, though.
Yes, okay.
It's true.
Yes, I've seen that.
So another characteristic of people's, there's some personality traits that are related to ethics. One of them is called Machiavellianism, and one's called moral development. It's by a guy called Kohlberg, and maybe the students can read about that if they want to.
Could you give a short introduction to each one? Machiavellianism kind of tells its own story.
Okay, so Machiavelli was an Italian prince who said we should be very pragmatic in our decisions to get the most benefit and not worry too much.
Not worry about it.
Yes, and so there's a scale you can do. It's called a Mac scale, and it can rate how extreme you are. And I did that in a classroom last year with 39 students, and the scale goes from, I think, the highest scores like 90 or 100 down into the 30s, and all the students put their grades up, and I came out the lowest. And it was interesting because I'm an older woman.
Right.
And they were all in their 20s.
Interesting. Okay. But there may have been some image management going on? Or?
No,
Okay.
I did it quite honestly, and
no, I
they
wasn't
did
talking
it.
about you. I was talking about, okay.
Well, they were high max.
Right.
Which they wouldn't want to be. I was
right.
a
I
low
understand.
max.
Okay, so the research played out.
And the females came out slightly lower MAC than most of the guys. The problem with that kind of stuff and the Kohlberg moral development stuff is, if I'm coming to negotiate with you about a car, I can't go up and say, could you complete these forms?
Please, before we talk.
I need to know.
Right.
So that's a problem that we just don't know. And the other stuff that will influence a negotiation is the past relationship between the negotiators.
Right.
The reputation, if I've never negotiated with you before.
So relationship with others that you know about.
Yes, that I hear about. I might have incentives to, if I'm an agent, so some of the research shows agents tend to be more deceptive because somebody's giving them incentive to get an outcome. So there's all these dimensions of the negotiation that will influence how ethical the negotiators are.
I love the way you said that without saying anything specifically about lawyers. And I appreciate that. But or
real
lots
estate.
of agents and
Real estate agents,
many of us act in a semi-professional or unprofessional way as agents. We act on behalf of others, and so there's a lowering of kind of this sense of moral responsibility or ethical responsibility when it's not.
If you're rewarded to behave badly,
right? If
you're going to behave badly, aren't you? I mean,
Yeah.
that's goals do that to us. If we're told, if we work out harder that we can eat more, we'll work out harder.
Yes, we will.
And if we're told that we've got a bonus coming if we can get the price in at a certain level, then we might be prepared to withhold information.
Right.
We might be prepared to leave some misinformation around that the other party can find.
Yeah.
Do things that we consider ethical and okay.
Yeah.
The other party mightn't share that view.
Right. Well, let's talk a bit then about the categories that you started. So like there's lying or there's misinformation. So when we talk about unethical behavior, what are we talking about in essence? What are the categories?
So there's two categories in. I guess I think of it as three categories in negotiation. There's information. What can we do with information? We can give misinformation, i.e. lying.
Yes.
We can withhold information.
Right.
So that's the information manipulation.
Right.
We can do things like make threats, which some people would consider unethical, whether or not they're true threats. Right. If you don't do this, then I'm going to make sure you never do business in this town again. Right. Or if you don't do this, I'll kill you. That might be a bit of a harsher threat.
Yes.
There's promises. We can make false promises. We can say, well, if you give me this concession now, when next month when we've got the goods from you, we will increase the price.
Right.
And then you turn around and don't do that, then many people would deem that as, well, they would classify it as a false promise, and many people would say it was an ethically ambiguous thing to do.
Right.
Then there's the action things. We can put pressure on the other party by doing something to them, by changing negotiators, by creating a difficult environment for them. There's some very famous stories about some Australian iron ore negotiators bringing the Chinese in and feeding them sandwiches for day after day.
I'm familiar with some, or placing the other negotiator in a lower seat to feel
so all that kind of stuff.
Incessant pouring of coffee.
Yes. So there's those doing things.
Yes.
And then the last category is our emotions. Okay. And the research shows us, or tells us, that emotion manipulation is much more accepted than information manipulation. Things like feigning happiness. Yes. I'm so happy to see you. Right. And this is going to be a great negotiation, and I think that's a great idea that you've just made, even if you're thinking, sucker, I'm going to reel him in. Or feigning negative emotion. So acting, I'm really quite annoyed that you've made that ridiculous proposition. Right.
How can you talk to me that way? I'm walking.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's another category.
Yeah.
And so the research is kind of classified. We call them ethically ambiguous negotiation tactics because they are ambiguous. What you think is ethical isn't what somebody else thinks is ethical.
Right. So when you find, so I understand 3 categories of information, action, and emotion. Is that so? So people do all sorts of things along some of those three lines, and as you say, a lot of them, I guess their trickiness is in their being ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them might be ambiguous because we don't know whether they intended it or not, or some of them might be ambiguous because you view things one way and
They
I
view
have
them
another
another
set of
way.
values and
Yeah.
it looks another way.
Yeah.
But looking at it from our side right
Yeah.
now, when people, let's look at it from the perspective of when others do them
Do
to
something.
us. And I'm
Yeah.
going to leave the topic of when do we or do we not do things to others. I'm going to leave them both to your own ethical code, dear students, and also for other speakers and maybe reading and other learning that you'll do to try and flesh that out. But let's talk about when people do these things to us or when we experience these things. Or what can we do?
Okay, well, before what can we do, I want to give you due warning. When somebody does something that you actually label as unethical,
Yeah.
you're going to be mad. You're going to be
Right,
upset.
right,
Because
right.
it's your ethics that have just
Right.
been violated. So you're going to have a strong emotional response.
Yes.
And
I think that if we take a moment, and I'm pausing in a moment, and we could even ask students, and I'm thinking myself, I have a case in mind at which someone just in the middle of a negotiation said something that I knew based on prior information was an outright lie. I remember my own, it was an emotional reaction, and I remember how physically I felt
visceral.
it was very visceral.
it's a visceral
Yeah.
reaction when
Yeah.
somebody violates your ethics. You get mad
Yes.
usually. So the first thing is to recognise when you get that mad feeling,
Yeah.
you have to say this is a tactic.
Yes.
This isn't
Yes.
This isn't somebody out to get me and to damage me.
Right.
They're in a negotiation. They may have done it strategically,
Right.
and I have to label it as a tactic. So the
Right.
best thing we can do is have an understanding of the types of tactics that we consider unethical,
Right.
and then we can go, he just changed negotiators on me because he knew that would
It would
upset
really
me. It would
So
have
it's
an
really
effect.
recognizing it and naming it internally,
Yes.
knowing, oh, okay, that's what he or she just did to me. It's an emotional thinking,
Mhm.
right? It's an information withholding. He lied to me. Okay. Okay. Yes. Next.
So that's the
yeah.
first thing we can
Yeah.
do. Then depending on the culture that you're working in, you
Yeah.
might be able to call it out, not say you've just done something I consider unethical. I
Right.
wouldn't recommend
Leave-
that.
Leave the E word out of it.
I wouldn't leave it out, but I wouldn't call that
Yeah.
as unethical. I would say, well, I don't think you would usually behave in that way.
Yeah.
I think all the evidence I have of your behaviour is that we're trying to seek a good solution and just encourage them to
Back
do
to the I
more
get it.
normal.
So like up till now, every indicator I got from our interaction was that you were working with me and that
Yeah.
we were working
Yeah.
together to get a deal. And something just happened that really threw me off, and I'm
Mhm.
wondering if we can get back to the first path.
Yes.
Because something
Yeah.
along those lines.
So,
Yeah.
that's what I would recommend
Yes,
rather
yes.
than saying, you just did something I consider unethical.
Right,
That's probably
right.
not going to strengthen the negotiation
Right.
process. So if you're in a culture where you can be that direct,
That direct, yes.
then go ahead and do it. You might just want to call for time out. That's
Yeah.
certainly in my experiences when I've been negotiating with other people and they've done things that I deem unethical. I just go away and say,
Yes.
well, let's reconvene.
Yeah.
And do all the stuff that we know works. Take it to another venue. Let's go to the
Really
coffee shop and
taking a break
talk at it.
and
Yeah.
changing perhaps, and perhaps in more indirect cultures sometimes. This happened to me a couple of times that I can remember. Sometimes that's enough in the sense that sometimes just by the fact that you initiated change
Mhm.
after their infringement kind of signaled to them that you were onto them and and things might.
I've also heard a very powerful tactic. I study Australian and Chinese negotiators, and something the Australians did, which would kind of be counterintuitive
Yeah.
in negotiation ethics, but they got very mad at the Chinese, and the Chinese were so shocked because for months up until then the Australians had been face giving,
Right.
and so they counteracted with feigned anger.
Yes.
And it worked in that circumstance.
Yeah.
So whatever you do, my advice would be see it as a tactic and respond strategically, not emotionally.
Right. So if you respond, the response should be through your strategy, a tactic that is set to counter
or
the ethical infringement, and hopefully bring it back to a negotiation place,
yes.
and less into a contest of you liar, I'm not a liar. You
well,
did.
we just get into that tit for tat spiral,
Right.
which all the research says doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
But so hard to
Yeah.
avoid.
Yeah.
Well, wow. And not only is this, and I think this is a great example of how ethics seems to be, a kind of a top level, let's think about things and what is morally right, morally less right. But we're also talking about things that very practically happen at the table. We experience them at the table, we do them at the table, and we counter them at the table.
Yeah.
And I think you've given us, on both of those levels, some very, very helpful messages and advice. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
My pleasure.